Okay, ready for chapter 5, producing manufactured goods. So, all right, so the one thing about this chapter is you're going to find there are a lot of abbreviations. It's almost looking at scattered letters of alphabet soup all over the place. So bear with me, we'll get through it, it'll be okay. And hopefully you will find that a lot of this information is really interesting, very useful, probably a little scary. Again, science can be extremely uncomfortable. There's no way around it. It is easier to be ignorant, but that's not why we're here, right? Okay. Don't forget about this week's topic, this week's assignment, sorry. Check that out. So this is Emily Penn on the body burden of our plastic problem. And here are the objectives. Now, it's a bit of a extended sort of chapter. So whatever we don't finish this week and with this lecture, we will just carry that over to the next lecture. I don't want to rush through some things. So again, some things I want to stress, some things I'm going to be working on. Here are some of the terms for the whole chapter. Again, this might be modified along with some of the competencies. So the version you see might be a little different. All right. So, an introduction. Well, really, this has to do with a lot of changes that we've gone through socially and economically in the US. And, we've started off, well, I don't know if you've talked to your grandparents, you would probably know that they were, especially, well, my parents and my grandparents, they grew up during the Depression. And oh my goodness, nothing ever got thrown out. I mean, you would buy shoes that were going to last you until they wore out, and then you would just get a new sole put in. And if you outgrew a shoe, you passed that on to other people. So you used it up, you would wear it out, you'd make it work. And again, it was all about thrift. You save bottles and cans and wooden boxes, and you just, you were just very, very thrifty. Okay. And so, and unfortunately, things have changed now. Now we're into the good life, and we are, our economy pretty much drives how things are made. Everything is disposable. Believe it or not, they did make disposable cars in the 80s. I test drove one of them, and it was a K car, and they were disposable. And I live actually in a house that I think is also disposable, as I have had to replace just about everything in this house. And it was built at the last part of the 20th century, so not too long ago, at least I don't think so. But everything is disposable. And our clothes, I mean, we went $9 items of clothing, and wow, if it wears out, and it will, if it snags or just looks bad, we just throw it out. And this is the way things are, progressing in this country, but it can't really keep up. We can't really keep doing this. All of these lifestyle changes have changed how we manufacture things. So it affects industry, and of course, it produces pollutants. And this is going to change our air quality and our water quality, and it has produced a lot of hazardous waste. Okay. Just to show you, if you're wondering, what is this? So this is a little apartment in Amsterdam. Amsterdam has one of the, when it comes to high quality living, they really have, people really have good medical care, good housing, that sort of thing. But everybody lives very, very modestly. So last year when I was in Amsterdam, I stayed with a friend's daughter and son-in-law at their tiny little apartment. And I do mean tiny. Now, they actually have a house very close to the Rijksmuseum and all the Dutch masters. This is a nice apartment, but can you see, here is the living room. There's the dining room. Do you know where they got the dining room set? Which, by the way, is really cute. So in Amsterdam, anything you don't want anymore, you don't have room for, a lot of times that's why you don't want it, you leave it on the curb and someone will take it. And then when you're done with stuff, you leave it on the curb. So that's just the way it is. People know. So all of their chairs, they're mismatched, and they were found on street corners. Yeah, by the way, so uh, as far as this couple, one is a computer programmer and the other one works with credit card fraud internationally. And they travel throughout the world. I think they've been to almost every country, if not every. This is their kitchen. Fridge on the top, freezer on the bottom. Yep, this is it. And I'm standing pretty much on the one end of the room, and everything is recycled that possibly can be recycled, and that's just a way of life. You don't have to search hard for a recycling bin. They're just always there. It's just understood. Okay, so again, as opposed to, and the clothing there again, by the way, in Amsterdam, the clothing is very nice, but everything is expensive because everything is made to last forever. So you buy, classic clothes that you will wear probably till the day you die. The classic jacket and the slacks and a couple pairs of shoes. That's about it, I mean, just basic stuff. And if you bring new stuff in, then some old stuff goes. But this is pretty much what we are dealing with, though, with the way that we are consuming goods and throwing out. These are clothes and plastics and all kinds of things that are creating pollution problems. It just is. So, and we have new chemicals all the time being produced, and they're being exposed to human bodies. And our bodies don't know how to deal with all these new chemicals that we are creating to create all of these new products that there's a demand for. So we all want things prettier and faster and inexpensive. So yeah, that there's a cost to all of that. And this is just showing some of again, some of the chemicals, the pollutants in the air you can see, in the water sometimes you can't. And here are some workers with their personal protective gear dealing with hazardous waste. So there's some problems here. Okay, so let's talk about some of these chemicals. So we're going to start off with synthetic organic chemicals. So, and specifically organic solvents. So if something is organic, then that means it's going to have carbon, hydrogen, and solvent means it's going to dissolve things. Now, water dissolves things. Water is kind of one of those universal solvents, but it only works if the substance has a polar kind of molecular structure. What does that mean? That means that, okay, it has a little charge to it, like a plus or a minus, and that's why sugars and salts and things like that dissolve very easily in water. But there are a lot of things like oily substances that don't dissolve in water. Oil and vinegar, oil and water, don't mix, because these substances are nonpolar, meaning they don't have a little plus or minus charge to them. So, okay, so we tend to, if we have these oily things like motor oil, motor grease, things like that, we want to dissolve them, clean off equipment, machinery. Then we have to have something else that is in fact oily. And there's going to be some problems with this. Of course, there is. So here we are. Now, I don't know. Now, my father was very blue collar. He worked with machines and he could fix just about any machine. Anything he couldn't fix, he'd make it. So, yes, he worked with all kinds of solvents. And again, these are chemicals that dissolve other solvents, but particularly the organic ones. They are used for usually a lot of them have a petroleum, fossil fuel history. That's where they came from, and they are modified according to what they are supposed to clean. So, yeah, so where do we get these cleaning kinds of chemicals? Well, they are made and used in petroleum refineries. We get them in the chemical industry. We see them used for degreasing metals in electronics, in the electronics industry. And in the textile industry, lots of these things are being used for many different reasons. Sometimes to fix certain dyes. In other words, when you put something in the washing machine, something that has pretty colors, and they all bleed all over the place, that red shirt that bled onto the white shirt, now everything's kind of pink to red in color, yeah. Or, just to keep all the colors attached and not moving and bleeding out. So a lot of times you will use certain synthetic organic solvents in the dyeing and industry. And also, if you're going to clean something that's, oh, I don't know if it's dry clean only. Maybe it has stains. You can't quite get the stains out. And if you use water, the fabric isn't going to tolerate that. So you use a lot of dry cleaning chemicals. Well, that again is where you would see these kinds of organic solvents. Now, where are they going to go? When you're all done, where are these solvents going to go? Well, unfortunately, a lot of them end up in groundwater as groundwater contaminants. I just want to show you, speaking of Amsterdam. So if you shop for European clothing, a lot of times you might get something like this on your tags. And this is confidence in textiles, tested for harmful substances. And here it is in German. This is from a Ula Popkin. They sell internationally. So ladies and gentlemen, if anybody's interested in fluffy clothing from Europe, they do sell through the United States. And the ones that are made for European sales are going to have little tags like this to tell you that, okay, there are certain standards to make sure chemicals aren't going to be in your clothing and won't leach onto the skin, which would not be good. Okay, more about that a little bit later on. But this is just to show you how chemical solvents that are used in industry for whatever reason, again, for like if my father was here, he'd be working with machines, and okay, what are you going to do with all of this stuff? Well, then has to get released, and it can, dissolve, be released into the groundwater, and then, your well water could very easily pump some of these chemicals back up, some of these organic solvents. So, why is that a big deal? Well, here are some health effects. Most of the organic solvents affect the central nervous system. What part of the nervous system is that? Well, that's like the brain and the spinal cord, so not a good thing. It's going to, not a lot of organic solvents are also toxic to the liver and the kidneys. Nobody wants to go on dialysis. That's not good. And some organic solvents like benzene are carcinogens. So, yeah, that's something that you don't want to have happen. So benzene actually is a group 1 carcinogen known to cause leukemia, linked with leukemia. There are also some other organic solvents known as chlorinated solvents. They're chlorinated solvents because they have chlorine attached to them, and a lot of times they even kind of sound like chlorine. So and you don't need to know all of these, but this is like chlorethylene TCEs, and this is a group 2A carcinogen, and there's many others. And again, some are very widely used as solvents. They're everywhere in your garage, at work. They're in the clothing you wear. They're just very, very common. Here are some non-chlorinated solvents like benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene. In research laboratories, we're always using xylene. And in fact, we just had a discussion that to clean our microscope lenses, we were not going to use xylene. There are other ways to do it. So yes, maybe look for alternatives. And here are some of the chlorinated solvents. Again, they have a lot of letters, but trichloroethylene, tetrachloroethylene, and ethane, sorry. Okay. So, okay, I can tell you that this is bad, and everybody tells you things are bad. Really, the best part about an education, or maybe the scariest part of education, is that you need to know why they are bad. Otherwise, you just have to kind of take people's words, their word for it, and then it doesn't quite stick. And so we need this to kind of stick. Okay, so let's talk about the action of organic solvents. And I have to generalize because there are so many organic solvents out there. So what are some of the actions? How do they hurt us? Well, they're going to hurt you at a cell level. And because there are so many different chemicals out there, there are so many actions, and some of the things we don't even know yet. But here's some of the things that we do know. Some organic solvents will disrupt plasma membranes. Is that a big deal? Yeah. So your cell, all cells have to have a semi-permeable membrane. That is to let good things in, bad things out, and just kind of block stuff. If you remember this from your anatomy and physiology, and I hope you do, okay, you have this little phospholipid bilayer, and that's your barrier. So that's supposed to let, good things like oxygen through, carbon dioxide out, and, little particles, and water has to come through. Those have to come through easily because, well, like water and oxygen, you need those all the time. So the one like big particles like glucose and charged particles, they are going to be stopped because the lipid part of these little phospholipids, so it's a phosphate head here, two little lipid tails sticking out. So that's one phospholipid, and they form two layers. Okay. These are the lipids are fatty, kind of lipidy substances. They don't like anything that's polar that has a charge, and they won't let them through. And that's good because if they got leaky, then things like nerve impulses would be all messed up, if you remember your physiology. Okay, so they have to kind of keep things regulated. What comes through, what does not. Anything that's charged, like sugars and salts, okay, metals, they're not supposed to get in. But what if something is lipid soluble? Like, oh, I don't know, an organic solvent that comes from a hydrocarbon substance, a hydrocarbon structure. Hmm. Guess what? Non-polar, and it's going to mix really well with the other non-polar little lipids, and they sneak in, especially if it's a very small molecule, okay? And organic solvents are really good at getting in and breaking stuff up and slipping through membranes and sometimes being very small molecules. So there you go. So organic solvents enter when water-soluble molecules are stopped. Again, the lipids, these are non-polar too, and they let them on in. So, Now, some of these solvents will disrupt the cell membrane and even break it up. Okay, once it gets in there, it wedges in there and makes big holes in here. This is bad. Okay, you must have an intact cytoplasmic membrane. If it becomes leaky, yeah, bad, bad, bad. In fact, when we want to kill bacteria, we give them there are chemicals, poisons to kill bacteria that will disrupt their membranes and sometimes can hurt ours too, which is why sometimes antifungals can be very toxic to us. Yeah, anything that messes with membranes is pretty toxic. So these, again, some organic solvents will do that. Things like paraffin oil, okay, just something you wouldn't think are bad, but they can do that. Okay. So how about some other things? Well, okay, are there other membranes other than just the outside of a cell? And this is a neuron. Hopefully you recognize that. Neurons are cells. Here is the nucleus. Here's the mitochondrion. And this neuron is going to send an impulse using a neurotransmitter chemical. These kinds of things need to happen if you want nerve impulses. And you want nerve impulses, don't you? Okay, so I always tell my microbiology class that a cell is like a city. In my world, it is anyway. So, cities have factories and they manufacture stuff, and you got to make energy for the cell. And okay, well, if a cell is like a city, what would the mitochondrion be? Well, that's the power plant. Now, the mitochondrion, this little power plant, has a double membrane. What do you think would happen if that double membrane leaks? No power. Okay, pretend that all your power went out right now. That would be bad. Yeah, okay. All right, so, and not only membranes are disrupted, but also membrane enzymes. So there are little enzymes around here that would be disrupted. Now, if a cell is like a city, what would be an enzyme? Enzymes are proteins that basically do all the work. So if a cell is like a city, the enzyme would be the workers the people that make things happen. You can have subunits like, oh, I don't know, materials kind of entering the cell, but they'll just sit there unless you have an enzyme putting them together, manufacturing, more factories and doing work for the cell, making things like hormones and neurotransmitters. So, yeah, let's see. An organic solvent that would mess with enzymes, that would not be good. And you know what? It's not. In fact, that's somewhat a lot of the antibiotics do also is they target certain enzymes that are important. So, yeah, we want our enzymes in our cells working very well, especially the enzymes in our neurons. Okay. So, just as a good example, what particular enzyme? You want to know what kind of enzyme? Okay, let's talk about what enzyme. So, as far as the risk is concerned, some organic solvents, such as hydrocarbon organic solvents, including kerosene, white spirit, and gasoline. So, what they do is they inhibit an enzyme called ATP synthase. So I always tell my microbiology students, how do you know something is an enzyme? Well, it usually ends in ASE. Mostly the name of the enzyme will also be there in the prefix. So ATP synthase, this must be an enzyme that synthesizes or makes ATP. You'd be right. In fact, this is the major enzyme that makes ATP for the cell. What is ATP for the cell? Well, it's like electricity. If a cell is like a city, that means that, okay, ATP is electricity. Now, if you interrupt the enzyme known as ATP synthase, you're going to have a blackout. And that's going to be the end of your cell. Okay, and if all your cells get a big blackout, that's the end of all your cells. So cells die, tissue dies, organs die, blah, blah, blah. Not good. So all cells are going to have ATP synthase, and they're right here, by the way, in the mitochondrion. Okay, so that's bad. Again, it's one thing to say organic solvents are bad and deadly and poisonous, but you kind of need to know why. So here we are. How about something, an organic solvent known as toluene? Well, we know that it affects neurocircuitry. So again, the nerve impulses are not getting passed, from one neuron to the other, or maybe the neurons to the muscles. And, that would be bad, especially if this was running to the heart or something like that, or if this was in the brain. So toluene is considered one of the most psychoactive volatile solvents. And we know that it alters the synaptic transmission in brain circuits. Gee, so we don't have our brains working? It's kind of like no communication between brain cells. Yeah. So, and by the way, usually it especially messes with the part of the synapses that is associated with addiction. Just a little FYI there. So, just a little side note. Okay, and then I'm sorry, I know the font is very small, but you don't need to know all of these sources of benzene. But benzene is also a very, very common and very toxic organic solvent. So here we are here. This is something that, my dad and my brothers, all of them love motorcycles and cars. And my dad redid a Model A and a Model T, and my brothers were kind of into that too. So they were exposed to a lot of this stuff. Now, what's the problem with benzene? Well, it's very toxic. How is it toxic? Well, it is toxic to hematopoietic progenitor cells. So if you're like, okay, I haven't had my coffee yet, go back. I kind of remember what that means. But all right, so in your bone marrow, okay, this is where you manufacture all your red blood cells and your white blood cells. So the red blood cells that bring oxygen and the white blood cells that fight disease and cancer. Okay, so you have to have cells that are called progenitor cells that eventually will undergo division and make these other later on cells. So you kind of have the stem cells, which are the progenitor cells, and then they divide, and then you make the red blood cells and the white blood cells. Platelets are also in there as well. So if you are exposed to benzene, again, no, you're going to lose your red blood cells, your white blood cells. That's going to be bad. Where do we find this kind of stuff? Well, again, pretty much everywhere. And I have a lot of things listed. You, of course, you do not need to memorize any of this, but to be honest, if you have a garage, if you you know, if you're living in an apartment, you may not have any of these, but probably, you know, you might have come into contact with this. Varnish thinners, even if you refinish furniture, you probably have come into contact with benzene. You know, when you read the labels and they say use gloves, use a well ventilated area. If you get it on your skin, wash it off. Yeah, follow those instructions, okay? All right, moving from organic solvents, and there's a whole lot more we could talk about, but we'd be here forever. Besides, let's move on to plasticizers and bisphenol A. These are chemicals that you find everywhere. Do I mean everywhere? Yeah. Okay, look around you right now. See any plastic? Yeah. You're probably looking at phthalates and bisphenol A substances and probably a whole lot more. But these are the big ones we're going to talk about. Do you like buying scented, like room fresheners and something to spray on your furniture, make it smell fresh and happy? And I don't know, garbage bags that are scented and dryer sheets that are scented. Yeah, okay. Phthalates. So what you're doing is you're buying toxicants. Okay, so here we are. Let's talk about phthalate plasticizers and bisphenol A. Okay. So by plasticizers, that means they're used to make plastics. Just about all kinds of plastics, okay? And again, usually if you look at a plastic, when you see one, you'll probably see the other, not just phthalates, but also bisphenol A. Sometimes you'll hear it said bisphenol, but it's biphenol, the proper pronunciation. So whenever you're making plastics, okay, very common in plastic production. Also, bisphenol A's, you like soup cans? You like to buy or you buy food in cans. Usually the lining is plastic and usually contains bisphenol A's. You're really at risk, by the way, if you have something acidic in that can, like tomato sauce. If you're Italian, Italians, they love to cook with all that wonderful tomato sauce, and I'm going to make myself hungry, so I better not go too far there. But tomatoes are very acidic, and that will actually cause the breakdown of the bisphenol A, and it will leach into the food. And really, you don't even need to do that. If you emptied this out and added fresh water, and there were studies that did this, and just used very pure, hyper pure water, the bisphenol A's would just even leach out into the pure water. It doesn't even have to be acidic. But if you have acidic substances in there, it'll even leach faster. How's that? Like I said, both are present in some plastics, actually a lot of plastics, and they can even move in the air, okay, and get into the contents in the containers, as I mentioned earlier. Okay, so let's look at where these things are found. Have I mentioned everywhere? The phthalate family includes things like PVC plastics, okay, and a lot of other plastics that are found in toys. These substances make plastics flexible, and and sometimes even spreadable. So you like fingernail polish? A lot of the fingernail polishes will have these chemicals or one of the phthalate family chemicals. There's a lot of them in here. The only one I'm really going to stress probably is PVC. And just know that all of these are in the phthalate family. If you know phthalates, you're fine. And know what that would include in a lot of your flip-flops and toys and insulation for your cords and hairsprays and makeups. All of them are probably going to have phthalates. If you look online, it just goes on and on and on the list. So it's very common in almost all consumer products. And if you did indoor sampling and surveillance biomonitoring, you're going to just see it everywhere, all over the United States and in pretty much all Western societies. And it can get into other places as well. Okay, so what are the effects? Well, we know that these are endocrine disruptors, and so it causes reproductive toxicity. causes developmental problems in males. We know it at least in male lab animals and male infants. Um, so it causes conditions, and we'll talk about this in more detail. But something called hypospadias. Sorry. Okay, baby girl. Okay, so when it comes to health effects, and we're going to go into this in great, great detail, but health effects of phthalates and bisphenol A's, they are endocrine disruptors. Do you remember your physiology? What is the endocrine system? Oh, yeah, all those hormones. Okay. And as a result, it causes reproductive toxicity. Remember that particular term? Yes. So we know that it causes developmental effects in male lab animals and male infants. Conditions such as hypospadias, and I might be mispronouncing that. I always thought that was right. But what happens is the urethral opening is below the gland's penis. So instead of here, it is here and along the ventral surface, kind of along down below the penile shaft. So, and this is measured in scientific experiments, and it reduces then the anogenital distance. More on that in a little bit. And there's emerging evidence to link obesity in lab animals and people also to phthalates, but especially biphenyls. Okay, more on that. So let's talk about plastics. And here are some of the plastics. You know, when you've seen these symbols, you probably thought, okay, which ones are recyclable, which ones are not. But there's more to it than that. There are a lot of plastics out there, some of which are more toxic than others. And here, I really don't get to talk about some of the like the bolus bags and things like that, but they are made of some of these plastics. And yes, a lot of the phthalates will end up in whatever solutions in the bolus. So, all right. So let's talk about plastics and how they have changed the world. Well, you know, with when we started to get petroleum products, new uses for petroleum products were made, including the ability to have this substance that you could mold into just about anything. Think about it. A few years ago, if you needed to make something, okay, it would probably have to be made out of wood or glass or metal. Uh, there weren't a lot of options. Okay, but when the crude oil industry introduced us to plastics, well then, okay, we could do a lot with that. So before World War II, there were switchboards and telephones and other uses for plastics. And the plastics improved with time, but we really didn't have a lot of plastics out there. Still a lot was wood. Okay, so pre-World War II, about maybe 1 million metric tons of plastic was produced per year. Then came World War II, and plastics became very popular and changed our lives and our lifestyles. Not just with the, well, fashion stuff like our shoes and hair combs and things like that, but our glasses, telephones. Okay, this is called a typewriter, you youngsters, and a radio. This is something that might look familiar. Maybe you've seen this in, your grandmother and grandfather's closet. But this is the original, one of the old cell phones. But yeah, I know I'm being funny. Forgive me. Okay, but again, what we could do has changed, and everything then changed. But these plastics, we're making a lot of it. Okay, so if we look at the production of plastics from 1950 down here all the way to 2015 up here, you can see there is a major increase in plastics. In fact, on average, we make about 322 million metric tons of plastic material every year. Okay. And this, by the way, so this is the blue line. The black line would be the average of plastic produced in Europe. So you can see that they've leveled out a bit. The United States, not so much. So from these petroleum products, Where's all this coming from, these plastics that require plasticizers and would have chemicals like phthalates and biphenyls? Well, okay, fabrics. Okay, your synthetic fabrics, your brushes, toothbrushes, hairbrushes, all those weed killers, makeup, pesticides. It just goes on, and I'll show you some pictures as we go along. Okay, so with all these new products and the demands for all these new products, there are new and new chemicals out there. Chemists at DuPont have been very, very busy, also with 3M and all the other big chemical companies. So right now, there's an estimated of about 80 to 85,000 chemicals that we know of. 7,000 of those are considered high volume, meaning they're the most popular chemicals that are used on a regular basis throughout the world to make plastics. Most of these are not characterized, meaning we really don't know what's in some of these chemicals, what they do, and we probably won't find out because for a lot of companies, it's an industrial secret. Their chemicals are, part of their product, and they don't want to share, and you can't blame them there too much. But there's some problems here. We do know that some of these chemicals enter the body. We know they do. Um, and do we consider these all innocent until they're proven otherwise? The ones that get into the body? Uh, we know with tests, if we look at your blood, we're probably going to find about 200 different chemicals that aren't natural. Are they toxic? I don't know. We don't know. Medical science doesn't know. Yeah, and so where do they come from? Again, environment, and pretty much everything you come into contact with. Your food, toys. That should be a comma, not food toys. Although food toys are they're the most fun. Shampoo, shaving lotions, just they're everywhere. Okay. And we know that we can find measurable levels of this not only in the blood, but also in the urine, amniotic fluid, and breast milk. So the biomarkers are plentiful for this stuff. Okay. Also, some of the other chemicals, we talked about pesticides like DDT. That is something else that we find very commonly. Atrazine, phthalates, as I mentioned before, parabens, and biphenyls. This is just to show that a lot of these chemicals are in pesticides and they get sprayed. Not DDT, at least not in the United States, but atrazine does. And a lot of the other pesticides, the phthalates, get sprayed. Okay. So, what you need to do, though, of course, no one's going to give up their plastics. Let's face it, there would be riots. You have to balance risk with usefulness. And, okay, do we want to go with no plastics? Well, there are people in the United States that do not really come into contact with plastics. Yes, these are the Amish. More on them a little bit later on. But, okay, can we all go back? Can we go in reverse? Probably not. There are just some things you can't unring a bell. We have the technology. In order to keep the technology, you're going to need the products like plastics. At least that's reasonable for now. Okay. So these plastics and plasticizers, is there association between those and disease? Well, most of the studies that you look at are going to be studies performed by epidemiologists. And if you remember though, okay, in order to, we can say there's an association using epidemiological statistics. However, if you really want to prove causation, well, that's not so much epidemiology. That's when you get into cell biology, which is like with those neurons I showed you a little bit later on, you need to start to see, the same effects in many, many studies, and you need to understand the biological activities and mechanisms that go on. And then you can start to say causation, which we have actually. The body of evidence keeps increasing, and some of these chemicals we've already banned because we know that the evidence is undeniable. So more on this a little bit later on. Okay, so let's talk about a lot of these chemicals again, like the biphenyls, the other chemicals like PCBs, and other things. Okay, a lot of these chemicals that I'm going to talk about are very common in the environment, and they are cause risks to the endocrine system. Like I mentioned earlier, if we're going to talk about these risks to the endocrine system, you need a little bit of a review of your physiology, okay? Remember this, oh, it wasn't supposed to all come up, but okay. So the endocrine system, if something is an endocrine disruptor, like these chemicals are said to be, then we have to know what that means when we read this in the news, when we hear this from people in lectures and read it in textbooks. We need to know, okay, is that a big deal? Okay, well, the endocrine system is a collection of glands that produce hormones. Hormones, are those important? Yeah, only if you need your cells to communicate. And I don't know about you, I like all my cells, especially the ones in my brain, communicating with the rest of me. That's very useful. So again, the endocrine system is going to make and receive signals for us. Our cells have to all run very efficiently. And so they're going to run everything, including your metabolism, growth and development, tissue function, sexual function, reproduction, sleep, mood, everything. It makes up the following little organs: your pituitary gland, your thyroid gland, your parathyroid glands, your adrenal glands associated with stress. I added that. Pancreas, of course, if you're going to talk about insulin and diabetes, you need to talk about the pancreas. If you want to talk about developmental problems, then you have to talk about the ovaries in females and testicles in males. So the endocrine system is going to affect almost every, well, it affects every organ and cell in the body. Understand that these signals, the signaling system is very finely tuned. And a lot of these hormones that these endocrine organs make are in very, very minute quantities. And if you've ever known someone who has to go in for and take pills for thyroid therapy, you probably know that it's very hard to get that fine-tuned. It's very hard. And strange things happen while you're trying to get things finely tuned. Strange meaning probably not good. So if you know someone who is, taking, thyroid hormones, well, then you probably know all of this. So if you talk about a chemical that is an endocrine disruptor, oh, things like DDT and bisphenol A's, and yes, the phthalates, although I don't have the chemical structure there, they're there too. So what do? They do one of two things. They will either block a hormone from attaching to a cell receptor, or they will look like a hormone. So they mimic a hormone. So what can go wrong there? Well, okay, so when it comes to thyroid hormones, they can either mimic a thyroid hormone or block it. Or when it comes to estrogen and testosterone, they can block them or they can mimic them. And we will talk about all of the consequences to that. So down here, let's say this is your nice little cell minding its own business. And this can be just anywhere, any one of these organs here, okay? And they're waiting for a signal. They're being told, waiting to be told what to do. So here's the normal receptor, and it's like a little protein, has a little groove here, kind of like a lock. And then the normal hormone kind of fits down there like a little key. And that tells the cell, let's go do something. We need to do something now. Males need to be males. We need to develop those testes, okay? Sperm cells need to be produced, all of that stuff. But if there's a chemical that fits down and lodges into that little lock area, like an endocrine disruptor, there you are. And again, it can block a hormone or it can look like a hormone. So it can do either one. More on that a little bit later on. Let's talk about assessing risk. It's really hard to do this. So you're thinking, all these chemicals are out there in plastics and they just let us keep buying plastics? Well, okay, our whole industry is based on plastics and very much fossil fuels and all of that. So, all right, yeah, and you have to have some evidence here. And again, assessing risk is very, very hard. Especially, okay, so you can ask someone if they smoked, when and where did you smoke? And you could assess risk. Okay, that works. And okay, if you ask if a person's been exposed to phthalates, bisphenol A, or pesticides, okay, and when was that? And how often was that? And okay, because they're everywhere. You can't separate populations. You can't say, well, okay, people in rural areas aren't going to be exposed, or well, you can't say people in urban areas aren't going to be exposed. You can't really do that. And again, when it comes to these kinds of chemicals, they're usually in small doses of many different kinds of chemicals coming at you over many different years. When I say phthalates, there's many different kinds of phthalates. Okay, so very tough to study. How do you separate populations exposed to plastics? You really can't. So you do a cohort study. Okay, let's just look again. Let's look at exposed versus non-exposed. Can't do it because everybody's exposed. Randomized tests in humans, yeah, that can't happen. So you can't say, well, I'm going to expose you to a lot of bisphenol A, and I'm not. Well, you cannot do that in humans, of course, like we mentioned earlier in the first unit, that is not ethical. Unfortunately, we're all exposed all the time and throughout a lifetime. If you were born, after the 1950s, there you go. And a lot of people, of course, they don't know to stop, their exposure. If you don't see it, shouldn't worry about it, maybe. Well, I always maintain it's the things you don't see that you should worry about. Because we can't do these studies in humans, we have to look to animal studies, right? Mice and rats. And we're going to study endocrine disruptors in these rodents. So I'm only going to look at two kinds of studies and results. One is going to be with phthalates. The other one's going to be in biphenyls. If you're going to do this, well, you're going to be looking at usually what we do is we expose the female rodents when they are pregnant because it's during that time in fetal development that this is going to have the biggest impact. Okay. The rest of, we tend to look at, a developing fetus because that's going to give us the most results. Okay. That wasn't supposed to come up yet. Okay, so we do know mice and rats exposed to small doses of phthalates. We know, as I mentioned earlier, that that there's a change in the anal genital distance. And what they did is they measured this in the mice, they measured it in the rats. With females, there's a very short distance. The anal genital distance is very short. In a healthy male, there should be a nice long distance there. Okay, and understand too, and this is going to come up a little bit later on, all animal fetuses are female until they receive the hormone to become male. So if you have, it turns out after a study, if you have males that have shortening anal genital distances, that's pretty much the feminization of these males. And we do know that increased levels of phthalates means shorter distances in males. Okay, and these are rodent studies. Okay. So how about biphenyl A's? Well, again, just like before we would expose mites and rats in utero, we would give minute levels, and we do this with both, by the way, minute levels of biphenyl A. So here's what we know, and I'm just showing you what the major studies are showing. There's probably other things going on. These are just what the major studies are telling us about the animal models and these endocrine disruptors in plastics. Okay, so if you give minute levels of biphenyl A's to a pregnant mouse or rat, the baby mice will develop hyperactivity and other behavioral disorders. I had a video a long time ago of mice literally jumping off the walls, and I tried to get that. I couldn't find it. I changed computers, so I'm not sure where it's stored. But anyway, as the mice develop into older mice, insulin resistance and obesity is very common. Also, tumors occur. In females, we get them in mammary glands. Males, we get them in prostate glands. Reproduction problems, well, the females will develop ovarian or abnormalities. Of course, that's going to be it's going to halt fertility. Males also are going to have problems with fertility, and as well as as I mentioned before, decreased penile development and also the undescended testes. And a whole lot more was found, okay, in these animal studies. Now, by the way, both mice and rats, when exposed to bisphenol A's, saw an increased rate in cancer. And again, with minute amounts of this. What about humans? Can we make any conclusions about this in humans? Well, as I said, mice and rats are animals. We are animals, and there's a lot of things that we do share. But for example, but do understand something. Um, Rodents are different than humans, and rodents are not humans. Babies are not big adults either, so babies are different. So it's very hard to do these studies. I hope you understand that this is the best you can do and do it ethically. But yeah, there's some, again, they're animals, we are animals. Um, Sometimes, though, we do see disturbing trends that seem to reflect what we saw in animal models. So, for example, we do know that there is a big increase in cancer rates, and this increase began in 1943. Well, that's post-World War II, okay, if you kind of forgot your history stuff. Since then, we've seen about a 400% increase in testicular cancer. So that suggests it can't be just genetic. There has to be something else, something environmental. Is it the plastics? Who knows? But again, this began in 1943. All right. We don't know for sure, but there might be, that we see a kind of a correlation, but we don't know causation. Okay, what else do we know? We know that the likelihood of women to develop breast cancer has increased. If you were around in the 1950s when there was hardly any plastic around, you had a 1 in 22 chance. Today, about a 1 in 7 chance. So there's a threefold increase. Again, genetics, environment, of course. Like I said, there has to be, you have to have the genes, but genes alone is not there. It's not going to explain why. So something must be in the environment. What is in the environment? Well, possibly plastics. Okay. Just so you know, by the way, a lot of these chemicals, when you add some of these chemicals that look like hormones, especially like estrogen, you add them to some cancer cells, it will cause the cancer cells to trigger and replicate faster. And there are videos, if you could probably Google it and find it on YouTube. But it's the reason that some women who have breast cancer are not supposed to be taking like hormone replacement therapy, because there's a risk it will turn certain cells on. It basically is a trigger. So this all seems to make a lot of sense. Again, our animal, or our rats and mice, humans, well, we do have our similarities. Humans are also animals. Again, we have our ovaries, we have testes, and understand the chemicals, the estrogen, the testosterone, all made in very minute amounts at very specific times during the development of an embryo. Again, okay, we start off, everybody, all the animals, the mammals anyway, they all start off as female. It's the testosterone that is going to make a male male. If the testosterone is not there at the right time and at the right amount, then that developing fetus is going to be female. Okay, plain old developmental biology. Okay, and again, all messages are very finely tuned. Otherwise, all are female by default. Now, add a foreign chemical. Okay, and that should be, a foreign chemical can have a drastic effect. Okay, and this is a study that was done in Nature in 2016. One of the things we found out with epigenetics is sometimes when you are exposed to chemicals or environmental factors, it not only will affect you and your generation, but also can be passed on to the next generation and sometimes even the next generation. This is all part of epigenetic inheritance. So we're finding that anything, if you were affected, if you were affected in your lifetime, you are passing down some of these. You could very easily, sorry, be passing down some of these problems and disease, and epigenetic diseases to your offspring and perhaps beyond that. How about obesity? Well, obesity, we know exercise and diet. Absolutely, it makes a big impact. And there are other things as well. Okay. And of course, there's always a genetic component. We know that. We have way too much evidence to deny that. So, genetics, exercise, diet, all part of obesity. One of the things, though, that we do know about exercise and diet is that about 95% of people who lose weight gain it right back, as if there is some set point. And okay, what sets the set point? Well, sometimes we wonder if it isn't something in the environment, something that is relatively new in the environment, something that we haven't had recently. Okay. But again, when it comes to what happens in the production of fat cells, it requires hormones. And again, minute amounts that are tightly controlled. Those are the ones that tell stem cells to, okay, when you replicate, some of your offspring should become fat cells. And what do fat cells want to do? They want to store fat. And that is certainly going to set a set point in individuals. Okay. By the way, time and time again, and all animal studies that we've done, we know that biphenyls cause obesity, even at low doses, over and over and over again. That would be the only difference in the environment. Biphenyls, they get really, really fat. Okay. But again, this is exposure in utero. Okay. And by the way, biphenyls are found in pesticides. Okay, and we also know, just as a little side note, if you increase estrogen, you increase the risk of obesity, and that isn't even in utero, that is also later on in adult life. Okay. All right, here's mom, here's the baby. Why do we warn pregnant women? This is always the biggest concern. Whenever you have warning labels anywhere, there's usually something about during pregnancy, pregnant woman, if you think you are pregnant, you have to take precautions. Because again, there are these little times in the development of the fetus when you have a developing human, which is so sensitive to chemical exposures, not only the natural ones, the normal chemicals like hormones, and nutrition, big time, which is why we want our moms to take all of those supplements. Very, very important. But there are the anthropogenic chemicals as well, the stuff that is not natural. And we haven't evolved to deal with these chemicals that have just been around since the 1950s. And again, they look just like the normal hormones sometimes. And, we respond to them like a regular hormone. So, not good. And again, keep in mind, though, the same exposure on an adult may not have the same effect on a fetus. So, for example, an adult could be exposed and maybe even in larger amounts, and maybe nothing happens. But because, again, the development of the baby requires, think of it as a huge switchboard, and the hormones come around and you have to hit the right switch in the right order at the right time. If you miss some of the switching, development is affected. And sometimes you don't even notice until later on. But again, this happens in the fetus. And it's different in the fetus than it is from an adult standpoint when it comes to exposure. And this is called the fetus effect. So, okay, so what does this rely on? Well, it relies on the timing, and the dose, of course. We know timing and dose. And okay, the little one in here got some genes from mom and dad. So who is exposed? And that way we're back to genetics. It's always environment, either natural or artificial, and genetics. Okay, it's always those. And here's a website that's been put out by this is more the European Union, and it's a website that says if you're pregnant, here's what you need to do to protect yourself from endocrine disrupting chemicals. In your spare time, you can go there if you like and look at the video. Okay, we just don't have time, but okay. And again, well, how about just exposure for one day? Is that going to be a big deal? Well, again, it depends on the timing. It depends on what it is. It depends on the dose. So exposure for one day early in development could affect you way, way, way down the line, years later producing disease. Okay. I wanted to talk about other endocrine disruptors here. This one, I've talked about this for a very long time. Triclosan. You ever heard of it? Have you ever bought an antibacterial soap? Okay. If you've purchased an antibacterial soap or something with the big letters antibacterial plastered all over it, maybe it was an antibacterial lotion from Bath and Body Works, chances are it had triclosan in it. And if you looked at the label, it would say active ingredient, triclosan. Years ago when we, in the microbiology laboratory, we tested it, and boy, it does kill bacteria, all right. Kills them pretty quickly, very effectively. But here's the thing, whenever, so what it would be a bacterial poison, okay? You need to look and see, okay, if what it's doing to the bacteria, is that also happening with your own cells? And people really didn't look at it. The FDA kind of put out some warnings and said, well, it may disrupt certain hormone levels. And that was actually in something I had from 2011 about triclosan, because I kept looking to see if it would be taken off the market. Now, when it comes to, by the way, Bath and Body Works, I did want to mention that they did pull it through from most of their products. And I don't see why they didn't, because all they needed to do is throw in some worthless alcohol and glycerin. Most of the public wouldn't know the difference anyway. And by doing that now, but I would like to think that they did it really being conscientious about human health. And they did it, in a thoughtful manner, not just, well, it's cheaper just to go with alcohol and make it alcohol-based hand sanitizers. But they did pull most of them out. And now triclosan has been banned from soaps and hand soaps and things like that. And thank goodness, because, all right, again, a lot of the mechanisms that attack the bacteria, it turns out it can mess with our cells too. So we know it stops membrane synthesis. We know it causes hypersensitivity. And the bacteria were developing resistance against it anyway. And we need to keep these substances for when we really need them. Sound familiar? Yeah, like anything else. And why? Yeah, well, okay. We know that it will cause, muscle contraction problems, especially in the heart. But again, thank goodness it's banned in antibacterial soaps. So Bath and Body Works, by the way, their antibacterial lotion was at a 0.3% per volume. And it did work. My students in microbiology wanted to know, did this really kill bacteria? It did. But here's the thing. Sometimes you have a patient who needs to decolonize themselves from MRSA, maybe before a surgery or something like that. And there are chemicals that we want to be able to give them to protect them. So maybe save triclosan for that. But again, there are some risks here. Okay, moving on. Of course, what do we prefer doing? Why use a blowtorch when a match would work? Soap. Soap and water. Not very sexy. It isn't going to sell, you're not going to spend a lot of money on this. It's not going to be a big industry. But you know what? It's good stuff. Soap, water. Okay. Here's another problem too when it comes to a lot of these little endocrine disrupting chemicals along with other chemicals. Sometimes when they're tested, you get that synergy effect. So sometimes, and I'm not talking about biphenyls and phthalates where we get effects with those, but with some of the other chemicals in the plastics, the plasticizers, sometimes individually we see them not causing any problem, but put them together and you get a big effect. So again, 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 7. And again, we are exposed to hundreds of chemicals each day. So it's very, very complicated working out just which chemicals are causing which problems. The ones that I'm telling you about, we have a lot of evidence. We need to do some stuff with that. So wait for certainty before acting. I mean, before we take it to Congress and say we're going to do something about this. Well, sometimes, especially people who are hit with very wealthy lobbyists, will tell you, well, there's too much uncertainty here. Well, yeah, okay. Science is never 100% certain. That's not what science is, really. We don't deal in certainty. We do deal in facts. And many times, especially when it comes to public health, you frequently have to make decisions based on the body of evidence that you've got. And yeah, there's always going to be some uncertainty because maybe we haven't done those experiments yet. Okay. Keep in mind also the scientists that are reporting these health effects. They are also citizens. They're breathing in the air, they're using the plastics, they're drinking the water, their kids are playing with these toys. They are citizens and they are parents too. Can things be changed? Well, we knew that lead was kind of bad, but we waited decades until we had all that information and everybody loved lead-based paints and it's everywhere now. And of course, we love lead in our gasoline because that gave us a higher octane, better performance for our automobiles. Well, and here's the other thing. You didn't get immediate intoxication usually. So I think I mentioned at the very beginning of this class, my chemistry instructor said, look, if it's going to kill you in 24 hours, we can get the chemical off the shelves in 24 hours. But if it takes 20 years to kill you, it's going to take 20 years before it leaves the shelf. So again, we know that these chemicals could very easily show effects later in development and then also again when it's too late. And that's what happened with lead. So we know about lead now. We know it's toxic. Why is that so weird? So do we keep repeating that? Well, let's just wait and see kind of response to risk assessment. Let's just see. Well, we don't have all the evidence. We're not certain yet. Well, we do have a lot of evidence. And again, the science is showing us this. Okay, so rodents and human correlations. Well, we can look at, again, trends over the last 50 years when we've had plastics, from the plastic golden age. Well, what are we seeing in humans? Well, we know that a lot of males are displaying abnormal development of their testes and as well as their genitals. We know that those cases have doubled. We know that testicular cancer is the first amongst young men. We know that fertility has decreased about 50%. Prostate cancer is about 4 times higher in the last 50 years. With females, we have increased rates of breast cancer, early onset of puberty in the United States. We see young women hitting puberty at 8 to 9 years old. And I don't know if you realize that that is weird, but in my day, you were closer to probably 12, 13, maybe even 14. That's a little late, but there you are. So earlier and earlier onset of puberty. We know that women are getting a lot of endometriosis and a lot of miscarriages. Endometriosis, you get kind of tumorous types of growth. And for all males and females, we're seeing increased obesity, increased diabetes, increased cardiovascular disease, and increasing populations of individuals with hyperactivity. And we can account for, again, everything is going to have a lot of factors involved as far as you can point to a lot of things. Our diet, our normal microbiota, lots and lots of things. But this could very much be a factor as well. Okay. By the way, biphenyls have been banned. The PCBs have been banned since 1977 in the US, but they are still long-lived and still measurable in people, and even we see it in semen, and it causes a decrease in semen quality. So what should you do? What do we do? I love this picture online. It's a little baby in personal protective equipment head to toe with little wooden blocks. Okay. Here's the thing. Most estrogen disruptors are not persistent like DDT, But, if you got the plastics hanging around, they might be leaching those chemicals into the soil. Are you going to avoid plasticizers? That's really hard to do. In this world, really hard. And so therefore you can't always control the route of exposure. You just can't. You're going to stop breathing, touching things, using plastics. You can look at labels, but a lot of times the labels aren't available. Try looking in your fridge. Look at all the plastics and see if you can see what kind of plastic it is. So the labels may not be available, or you may not be able to understand what it does say. Sometimes you find a label and there you go. And many chemicals are not reported because it is, once again, maybe a industrial secret. You can try to reduce exposure, sure. When it comes to food, maybe buy local. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so if I go to the farmer's market on Saturday or Sunday, I can bring my own bags and it's coming right from their garden. Chances are it didn't have much exposure to plastics, not through tubing or packaging or through shipping. So I can get it right from the local grower. Okay, and chances are they're not using phthalate pesticides, so that's a good thing. So you're thinking, well, I'll just go buy organic, no pesticides. Well, yeah, maybe, but you have to watch for the plastic containers. Okay, so looks like Whole Foods actually. All those plastic containers. The food may be grown organically with organic pesticides or no pesticides, but you have to look a little deeper. Okay, so what to do again with the phthalates? For young pacifiers, actually, phthalates were taken out, so that's a good first step. But what about young children, all the other stuff, the toys, and what about adult exposures? So you can't avoid, like I said, you can't avoid this stuff. You can try to inform regulators and tell them to take some regulatory action. And this comes up more in the end of this particular chapter. But really, we should have some regulation. We did it for lead. We did it for other chemicals. It's just, we can take maybe use alternative chemicals that don't leach out these nasty phthalates and endocrine disruptors. So here are some other tips. Don't buy microwave or don't microwave in plastics at all. Okay, there are some that are safer than others, but just don't take the risk, I say. Buy unscented. Scented products, usually the scented products have phthalates. Okay, maybe buy wooden toys. That's a tough thing to do. Use fresh instead of canned. Again, you have the cans loaded with biphenyls and things like that. You have to check out your makeup. Maybe look at the company, look on their website. And are all these going to work? Well, most experts say the evidence is not all in there. Is this really going to make an impact? Well, it's worth a try, especially if you're pregnant. We just don't want to expose women, pregnant women to all these chemicals. But here's some other things that you can do, okay? These are all also going to have epigenetic impact. So having the moms eat a very good diet, okay, that's really going to make a huge impact on prenatal development. And then also, when you've got a baby, an infant, stimulation, read and play and talk, and we know that has major developmental impacts. Okay, so something to think about. And I just wanted to show you that there was a study, and you can look at this online if you like, and they looked at 14 air fresheners that they found right off the shelf of Walgreens, found 12 of them had all kinds of different phthalates. So, little side note. So again, what else can you do? If you look on the bottom of plastics, most plastics will have a little symbol like this, and you probably have seen these and thinking, well, this tells me whether or not I can recycle. And of course, that's really, really good. But avoid plastics with a 3, a 6, or a 7. And you definitely don't want to heat those up or expose them to acids, acidic foods, that sort of thing. So this shows, you have some of the major bottles, the soft drink and water bottles tend to be 1s. Milk and water jugs tend to be 2. A lot of water detergents have 2s in them. When it comes to, a lot of our clear food packaging, unfortunately, those are threes. There are some other laundry detergents that are threes, sadly. For bread, the sleeves that we put breads in, most plastic wraps are fours, some bottles are fours. When it comes to five, you have a lot of soups, deli foods that'll probably have that carpeting. Um, other materials that we use around the house. Clouded plastic containers tend to be fives. The six, okay, polystyrene. We do know that that will leach into your foods. And number seven is kind of that mixed or other group. That's really the one to sort of look at suspiciously. And again, do not microwave with plastics, and whatever you do, don't burn your food because that will definitely release dioxins, which are carcinogens, which are actually, that's coming up a little bit later on. So when it comes to the bisphenol A's, again, endocrine disruptors, they are, like I said, they were banned first in baby bottles, but they were also used in dental fillings, linings of cans, plastic bottles, circuits in computers. They're all around. And we still see people, when we test them, 92% of their urine is going to be tested with bisphenol A. Okay, even this is a receipt. A lot of the receipts still have that stuff in it. So we like to buy our BPA-free bottles, right? But as one very smart student of mine once said, she says, okay, so they took out the one chemical. What did they replace it with? Very clever. Well, you have to kind of look into that, don't you? Of course, you can also become Amish. Like I said, we're back to them. But they don't use plastics and they grow their own food. They don't have cars. Some of them will test with low levels of phthalates. There was a study that was done, and the ones that tested positive, well, it just so happened that a few of them did ride in cars. And there were a few women that weren't supposed to, but they had some hairspray. Okay. So it revealed that they were using hairsprays. So that's another option for you. Okay. Uh, and like I said, these are just some of the chemicals that we find in plastics and just some of the chemicals that we know are being released as a result of industrial processes. BPA, phthalates, these are chemicals that have found their way into the public consciousness, but they are just the tip of the iceberg. And again, the plastics that are already made, what are you going to do with those? That's not even the worst picture, right? Let's talk about some other chemicals. Chemicals that fit under the category of persistent toxic substances. So here we have something called PCBs, okay? And when PCB production occurs, you usually get things like dioxins and furans that are again a product of those processes. So these are chemically stable, they are non-flammable, and therefore they're used a lot for insulation, electrical insulation. So a lot of your wiring doesn't go up in flames. It's important in electrical equipment. A lot of your appliances, for example, will have some of these PCBs in there. PCB, by the way, stands for polychlorinated chlorinated biphenyl. Sorry. And it gets into the environment as industrial waste, and it bioaccumulates, and you get biomagnification. Remember what happened with mercury. So little bits get into the little creatures, and the big creatures, little creatures are eaten by bigger creatures, eaten by bigger creatures, and it deposits in the fatty tissue. Okay. And we still see, we see these in a lot of places. If you look at paint and plaster and just building materials, it comes right off of industrial waste products. And again, the manufacturing process of PCBs create things like dioxins and furans as byproducts. More about dioxins. But all of these love the fat, so they are persistent. So they're going to, it's going to remain in fatty tissue. Okay. And in case you sort of forgot how biomagnification looks in a food chain, well, here you go. And you get biomagnification, of course. And, if you're interested in wildlife, there you go. It's important. If you like to eat fish, also important. If you want to drink water and breathe air, also important. Oh, sorry. This came from this is of Lake Ontario, trying to show the biomagnification chain. Okay. So, as I said, the production of some of these chemicals produce very toxic dioxins. Dioxins, these are very common in herbicides. Also, if you look at the paper industry, it's found in paper pulp and very commonly leaches out into the environment. If you burn these products, it is released into the air. So acute exposure can cause skin conditions. And here we have, and I just wanted to show you here, we have from car exhaust, from factories, burning wood, houses, all of which can put the dioxins in the air. And again, these are still, these are man-made materials. And again, it bioaccumulates, just like I mentioned, into animals, including farm animals, and away it goes into the human on the dinner table. It can end up in soil and sediment and get into rivers and oceans and all of that. So, yes, like I said, so exposed to dioxins. A lot of people are exposed, and it's detectable at low levels in just about everybody. Here's an image of someone that is, when it comes to skin conditions, this is Viktor Yushchenko. Sorry. He was a candidate for president of the Ukraine, okay, former Soviet Union area. He was poisoned with dioxin in 2004, and you can see the difference and what that happens. So it causes dermatologic effects as a result. So, okay, again, and this is just one of the health effects. And we see a lot of other health effects in test animals. Probably it's occurring in humans. Epidemiological evidence suggests that there's going to be neurological problems in human development, and that it could trigger probably more cancer and mortality. We categorize PCBs as a group 2A. Carcinogen group, and dioxins is group 1. Sorry, group 1. All right. By the way, the skin condition, I guess I didn't mention, this is called chloracne because of the chlorinated hydrocarbons that is in the chemical. So, pretty bad. All right. How about something else that is an endocrine disruptor? Polybrominated esters, PBDEs. I know. That just rolls off the tongue. These were very, very common fire retardants, and they do retard fires and keep them from burning you alive in your house, which is very nice. Could we use something else maybe beside this chemical that most likely causes thyroid disruptions and neurotoxicity? That would be good. It's found in a lot of chemicals, but not usually tightly bound to plastics or textiles, but it still can be released from from those products. Widespread in the environment, especially in the indoor environment. We see it in wildlife. We see it in humans. The use was banned in the United States, but it's still there. So if you've got some old flooring, some old plastics, some appliances, old clothing, furniture, pillows, tents, packaging, and just the dust in your house. By the way, so if you have a vacuum and you suspect that you have some problems, make sure that you have something that will filter with a HEPA filter, so it's not released back into the environment. So now it's breathable. You've kind of put particulate matter into the air and aerosolized it. Try to get a vacuum that has a HEPA filter, just to protect you, especially if you're pregnant or have a baby. Okay. We do know that PBDEs are linked to brain disorders, including behavior, attention, and dyslexia. This is something you're going to see probably in a lot of your baby boomers. So for those of you who are taking care of or will be taking care of baby boomers, well, they were all exposed to this. Fire retardants. There you go. All right. There are some other persistent toxic chemicals. I won't test you on these, but perfluorochemicals, I got it out. These are chemicals that we see in water and stain-resistant coatings. So, you might spray it on clothing or furniture, fabrics, that sort of thing. If you want to waterproof something, you might use these chemicals. Again, very commonly released in industrial waste. It's all over the environment and wildlife, and it persists in the body just like all of these particular chemicals do. It's, loves the fats, it's hydrophilic, and it is, unfortunately, there's not a lot of information on human health effects. What we do have is on animal models. Okay. How about ozone depleting chemicals? Ozone, we kind of remember that. Yeah, ozone. Okay. So there are a lot of ozone depleting chemicals. A lot of them have been banned. Yay. And once we sort of updated our refrigerant technology and a lot of other chemicals, we don't use these as often, but they're still out there. And what may be banned in the United States may not be banned in other countries, and sometimes it's likely they're not. But chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, these are, again, chemicals that if they get up into the atmosphere, they cause a lot of problems, including depleting the ozone. And again, they had a lot of uses, used for propellants, to get something out if you're trying to uh, if you were trying to, again, use hairspray, you wanted to get it out of the can, deodorants, anything that you just needed to get out of the can, okay, you would use the chlorofluorocarbons to do that. If you wanted to clean out your keyboard, with a propellant, you could do that. And when these chemicals were first made, they just seemed really great because we didn't see any toxicity. They were not flammable. They weren't corrosive. They were nice, chemically stable. And but unfortunately, because of their stability, they would reach, and they're very light. They would go into particulate matter, very small particles, get into the stratosphere, and then a lot of chemical reactions would occur to produce, basically the reduction, the net loss of ozone. And if you remember this from our Chapter 2 lecture, okay, you have your stratosphere here with a lot of gases, including our ozone. And remember, that's the one that protects us from UV light, especially the ones that cause things like cancer. So ozone, good. Okay, UV radiation, bad. So that's why we're pretty much banning the CFCs. They are bad. Okay. Toxics use reduction. So one of the things you could do is try to prevent the use of toxins, okay? So maybe use less toxic chemicals, use smaller quantities of toxic chemicals. And you can, if you've ever heard of green chemistry, this is where people go out and they think, okay, let's make something an alternative. For example, did you know you can get plastics that are made primarily out of corn? Yes, there are companies that will do this. So sometimes, though, there's some drawbacks. Sometimes they don't hold up as well as other plastics do. So, but if we invest in green chemistry, we will come up with alternatives. Okay. So, yes, we want to do some alternative chemistry to help solve problems, and not only for just every individual, but if you're a worker, if you're in a community, all of these, just reducing toxic chemicals. It's going to be good for everybody in every way, at every step of production and use, and even in waste. Okay, it's all good. Toxic metals. Okay, moving on to 5.2, toxic metals. And we've talked about a few of these. Some of these are going to sound familiar. And if you took chemistry, especially with Mr. Seberg, you're going to think, man, these are a lot of chemicals that I remember from the periodic table. Yeah, we're going to see a few of these, the toxic ones. Here's our friend lead, or is it, as I mentioned, So of course we know lead. It's it is released. It was it was added to fuels, fossil fuels for high octane. It was added to a lot of products like paints. At some time it was even used in makeup. Strange things have been put into makeup, by the way. In the workplace, there are still some risks. If you work with smelters, working with metals, if you work in demolition, for example, if you're pulling a ship apart, there's probably going to be lead in a lot of those materials. Um, we know that it affects the central nervous system, meaning memory disorders, attention disorders, maybe early onset dementia. Some of the peripheral nerves, they're going to have, so in addition to the central nervous system problems, you're going to have peripheral effects, for example, wrist drop. So as the name implies, you just don't have the strength in your arms and your extremities. So the peripheral nerves are affected. How about kidneys? Yeah, we know that it'll cause renal toxicity. It'll trigger high blood pressure. And of course, we always worry about our pregnant ladies. It can cause miscarriages and stillbirths. It is a neurotoxin, and we pretty much know that as a fact these days. Mercury. Okay, well, it's been banned in thermometers, but it's still used occasionally in manufacturing. A lot of its uses have been stopped, thank goodness. We do know that, again, it's a neurotoxin. It can cause excitability, delirium, hallucinations, and this is why we say mad as a hatter. Now, we used to use mercury in order to, well, we didn't, but if you were a person who made hats, thus a hatter, you would use mercury because what it did was it helped make the felt wool, and you could stretch it and form it better into a nice hat, nice stiff hat. So you were working with it, and of course, way back in the day, there was no personal protective equipments. Um, if you, in your spare time, if you ever listen to some of the NPR podcasts, there was a podcast called S Town, and I started to listen to it because I thought it was a criminal justice story. I think it's 4 installments. It's very interesting. There is a Mercury link to it, but I will warn you, don't listen to it if you can't handle a lot of really big swear words. My friend, who is actually a Latter-day Saint, a Mormon, she was listening to it, and she said, listen to it. She says, oh, but it was a little hard to take because she doesn't see R-rated movies or anything, but she yeah, raised my eyebrows quite a lot. But very interesting. If in your spare time, maybe while commuting or something someday. How about arsenic? Interestingly enough, arsenic is natural. It's widespread in the Earth's crust. Well, it is. It's an element, so not surprising, but sometimes it can cause groundwater contamination. But also there's industrial contamination that can occur as well. Factories, smelters that work with metals, like copper smelters, probably still will use arsenic. So again, that's going to be a risk for the workers and for contamination. Tanneries, when you work with hides, well, that was used very commonly because it kills microorganisms, anything that would rot your hide. So it was commonly used at some point. It is a group 1 carcinogen and has some serious neurotoxic effects. So pretty bad. Oh, by the way, if you're wondering what arsenic does, it attacks some of those enzymes we were talking about. So some of those proteins, the enzymes that run the power plant of your cell. Okay. Cadmium, also found in mining and smelting. If you're making lead or zinc, probably you're going to have cadmium there. It's also sometimes found in metal plating, especially the old stuff. It can cause chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and chronic kidney disease. It is, again, a group 1 carcinogen and will cause lung cancer. Chromium-6, found in chrome plating, leather tanning, also a group 1 carcinogen causing, once again, lung cancer. Beryllium. Now, this is a weird metal, not very common. It was used because because it is strong, it's lightweight, and is very widely used, or was, especially in high-tech industries like in aircraft and in aerospace. But it can cause some debilitating lung disease. It gets into the particulate matter, gets into the lungs, into the alveoli, causing scarring. And then you get the big scarring, the inflammatory diseases I mentioned earlier, and you get impaired breathing as a result. And again, it is a group 1 carcinogen, lung cancer. Kind of get the picture here. So, nanoparticles, which it really is nanoscale materials. When we talk about nanoparticles, so micrometers, a micrometer, okay, this is probably about the size of a bacterial cell. Nanometers, well, when you're talking nanometers, you're talking, oh gosh, maybe the size of a teeny tiny virus or even molecules. So nanoparticles are going to be very, very small, even less than 100 nanometers in diameter. So these are like ultrafine little particulates. Well, when you think of the small particles, remember when we were talking about molecular weight things, they have the ability to travel in the air very easily and get down into lungs if they're aerosolized, and they can get deep down into the alveoli, if you remember all of that. So they have, and there are many different kinds of nano materials, and they're becoming very, very popular. Drug companies are using them to deliver a lot of drugs, in fact, because they do get so deep down into the lungs. So nanotechnology is sort of big, but consequences of nanoscale technology. Well, like I said, they are small like viruses, so they get aerosolized. That means that they get down into the deep into the alveoli. Now, the drug companies may think that's good, but that's if it's controlled. What if you have nanoparticles that are floating around just as some kind of be something being released into the air accidentally? Okay. Well, the health effects, we really aren't very clear. There are a lot of hypotheses that are out there. I'm going to sort of go through these a little bit at a time. And again, keep in mind these are hypotheses. And again, the concern is due to known effects of ultrafine particles, but we're not always clear about what's going on with human health, okay? So these nanoparticles, as I said, they can get down and deep into the alveoli. Once they get down there, so what happens? Many times they become coated with things like proteins, okay? Now, when that happens, okay, so this is a foreign piece of material. So what happens to it then? Good question. Now you do have patrolling white blood cells, and they're patrolling the area, and they're looking for little things that shouldn't be there, like viruses and other particles. So is the macrophage going to take care of this problem for us? Well, the thing is our nice trusty little white blood cell, it doesn't really deal with things that are quite that small. I mean, it's even too small for them. They like things that are bigger than 65 nanometers, and some of these can be even smaller than that. So they may not really have a good role in taking care of these. So, okay, can it trigger other inflammatory responses, and maybe scarring? Well, maybe so. Um, we don't know. We don't know. Can it get into the blood? Well, it seems reasonable. And if it can get there, can it get to the spleen, the liver, the heart, and the brain? Seems reasonable. Because things just don't kind of sit there. Your body is designed to take care of things. So once it gets, say, into the tissue of spleen, liver, heart, or brain, one of the things that we have found is that nanoscale materials, at least in the laboratory, have been known to attach to proteins and cause them to misfold. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, proteins, for them to have a normal function, they have to have their normal three-dimensional shape. Okay, shape equals function for proteins. Good examples of proteins would be those enzymes that run all of the processes in your cell. Now, if a protein is misfolded, we know that what usually happens is the cell tries to take care of it in some way. A lot of times they'll try to bring it in and store it and in some kind of manner. Now, what can happen in nervous cells, neurons, is that it can form things called Lewy bodies. That was misspelled. Lewy bodies, and then they remain there. Okay, and again, why is this a big deal? Well, there are a lot of human diseases that are caused by misfolding of proteins, things that we don't understand. We're still trying to figure out why are these proteins folding and making these kinds of things called amyloid plaques. Amyloid plaques. Have you ever heard the term amyloid plaques? Well, you might have if you were studying Alzheimer's. If you were studying Parkinson's, a lot of neurodegenerative diseases are caused by human misfolding of proteins. And in fact, when we talk about the proteins that misfold, due to and cause spongiform encephalopathies, remember that is caused by prions, infectious particles. So a lot of bad things happen when proteins misfold. Now, this again is hypothetical. There are people who are working on this, but there is a concern not only for people who work with nanomaterials, but also for nanomaterials that do get loose. And as we, dive into nanotechnology more and more for anything from computers to medicine to basic consumer products, okay, well, we're going to be exposed to these more and more. Little side note here too, by the way, if you heat Teflon and get it hot enough, it will release nanoscale materials. So non-stick coating Teflon. Yeah, when I was raised, we had a lot of that around the house. So again, health effects are unclear. We just, we'll figure it out, I suppose, as time goes by and as research progresses. Okay, I would just want to close by showing you this particular label. And here are some ingredients in a some contents in a bottle. And if you read this, it has, oh my goodness, so it has carbon and sulfur and aluminum and lots of chemicals here that, pretty much the entire periodic table. So, but also the chemicals known, here we have arsenic, and over here we have mercury, and gosh, there's radioactive materials in here too, but going by here, cadmium and lead. Yeah, those are some of the chemicals that we've just talked about. And a lot of them have neurotoxicity problems, of course, and as well as have been known to cause lung cancer. And so what is this exactly? Is this some really nasty cleaning agent? Maybe one should wear gloves or a mask when dealing with this kind of stuff. Well, let's take a look at this bottle. So if you're still not quite sure what this thing is, let me just tell you, this is why it's really important to have a handle on science, sometimes just basic science. You don't even need to have a PhD in chemistry to be able to look at a label and say, arsenic and lead and mercury, that doesn't sound good. And I'm pretty sure uranium's not so hot either, even though maybe these other chemicals are not very familiar to me. So when you are in a health food store and you're trying to find a selenium supplement because you were listening to some interesting person on the radio telling you that all cancer is due to a selenium deficiency, and this is what happened, maybe you need to look at the label. So here's what was happening. My father was diagnosed with both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Now, know that my father was a machinist and he worked a lot with mercury. Mercury was also used very commonly to clean machinery and machinery parts. So he had serious neurodegenerative diseases. And my brother, who, by the way, does read, it's just a matter of, it's not that you read, it's what you read. And it's good to have a scientific background and use the internet to help you with this. But he had heard somewhere that, there was some veterinarian actually who said that all the cancers were due to a lack of selenium. And really, selenium, it's really rare to be in a population that has a selenium deficiency, but okay. So he was going to go in and somebody sold him this stuff and he brought it to Sunday dinner. I said, Brother did you read this label? So he probably pretty much knew at that point he was in trouble. So I read the ingredients. He was embarrassed and yeah, he was out some money. Now, I can tell you that probably these chemicals are in very, very low doses. Okay, it's all about the dose, right? But why would you spend around $20 for something that has this on the label? I wish that was the end of the story, but a week later, my sister brought the same product and said, hey, look what I got for Dad. Okay, so read labels, you guys. Sometimes, you will remember some of these things. You won't remember a lot of it. You can always look, be careful about your resources, but read, question, look at labels, and there you go. When we come back, physical hazards in the workplace. Yeah, we're kind of finishing early today. Well, that's okay. This will give you an opportunity to listen to TED Talks. Okay? Take care and have a great